Hello everyone, how's everybody doing? Hope you're doing fine. At least as good as I am, as best as you can, I guess. Going on 68 this year, so I can't be doing too fine. Not like when I was 20. Anyways, first thing I want to mention is we have a conference, and it's going to take place in a little country called city, right? Of a country called Lusaka, Zambia. Okay? And you can find more information at the Rational Science, rationalschool.com. Okay, and we're going to be debating, as we always do with people who go there, what rationality it means or is about. Okay, so if you're interested in understanding a little bit about rationality, if you think you're a rational human being, well, you'll find out in Zambia, okay? We will put you to the test, okay? So important to put it on your calendars. It's going to be, the 4th of April, Saturday, okay? That's when the discussions will take place, the presentations, okay? And we always have a lot of fun. Drink a lot of beer for those who like beer, okay? So anyways, hopefully we have a lot of fun over there. Anyways, today I was going to present something about Mr. Tommy, St. Thomas Aquinas, okay? And it's this fellow here I was talking about in the last couple of presentations, lectures. And I'm going to have to skip him today, okay? I was going to talk about him being involved with quantum particles, okay? And he does have a lot to do with that, okay? But I got to skip him today because what happened was I have so many comments and questions that relating to two things that Aquinas is involved with. One of them is particles, point particles, points, and the other one is God, the existence of God. What does existence mean? What is God? Does God exist? So there's so many questions that, I had to tie some of these loose ends, and it's just going to take up all the time today. So there was no point in just continuing with Aquinas unless we cover these points first, okay? So that's the issue. Anyways, before we can get to the subject matter today, I need to make sure that people who come to this site, who by chance happen to trip upon this channel, understand what the rational scientific method is and what this site is all about. We're not here to convince anyone. We're not here to persuade. We're not here to recruit. We're here to explain something. And we explain a mechanism, whether you believe it or not, whether you adopt it as yours, that's your personal business. But then you need to understand what the rational scientific method is, because it's very different than what you learn in high school or college about what science is. We say that the notion that is taught in high school, the notion that's taught in college, all over the world, we say that's religion. It has nothing to do with science. Okay, so you get a site that has a different notion of what science is. And unless you understand, not that you agree with it, not that you believe in it, not that you adopt it as yours, but if you understand what the difference is, then you can then you can follow this site. Otherwise, you're wasting your time, and you might as well go somewhere else. Okay, so here it is. Let's we put it in a nutshell, in a little picture, the whole thing, summarize it there so that you can understand what rational science is about, what we're proposing in exchange. And hopefully you'll see some differences with what you learned in college or high school. Okay, here it is. Anyways, according to us, science has to do with rational explanation. If it's not a rational explanation, it has nothing to do with science, and we push it off to religion. Science is divided in two parts, physics and philosophy. Physics is what we do here. We don't do philosophy here. We do physics. and it deals with objects first and foremost. You have to have an object to explain rationally how this universe works, how Mother Nature runs her shop. And what we try to do in physics is explain causes and mechanisms. That's what it's about, okay? And then on the other hand, we have religion, which is what we have today and is called science. And what that has to do with is opinions and beliefs. They try to convince you that they know the truth, they know fact, they say science is about knowledge, because that's what the word science meant for the last 2,000 years at least. They talk about proof and evidence. They talk about consciousness and sensations. In other words, they use the five senses, which is really one sense. We only have one sense, and that's the sense of touch. We can only touch things that hit our bodies somehow, are in contact with our bodies. Anyways, anything related to the senses is unscientific. We have no observers in science. Okay, and supernatural theories, we look at those as the traditional religions, like Christianity and Islam, Judaism, and so on. Mythology, you're into that. And then we have irrational theories, which involve practically all of mathematical physics. General relativity, quantum mechanics, string theory, all are irrational theories. Why are they irrational together with theism, atheism, and agnosticism? They are irrational because they are in the business of moving concepts around. See, in the case of traditional religions, they used objects. They said God. And you say, well, what is God? Well, God is this human-like figure. He doesn't look like a cow. He doesn't look like a snake. That's the devil. He doesn't look like a fish. No, God looks like me, like a human. The only difference is he's got a beard. I don't. Okay? Right now, I don't. So that's the only difference. But God looks like a human. He's got, four extremities, a head, a torso, etc. Right? And that's God. And so, that's the starting point. That's the starting point. And so you can understand that because you can imagine a human-like figure, doing stuff. No problem there. That's not what mathematical physics does. So-called physics. I hate that word physics after mathematical. They don't jive. They don't match. They're irreconcilable. Never the twain shall meet. And what they do in so-called mathematical physics, with quotations, is move concepts around. That's irrational, primarily. There are other reasons it's irrational and have to do with the fact that there are no definitions, no valid definition, not a single rational definition in all of mathematical physics. Especially of the primary words, the field, energy, mass, force, time. None of those words have ever been defined, and they never will be. And, they have excuses. They say, well, we can't define those words because we need other words to define them, and those words need to be defined, and it's an endless iteration. That's essentially at least that's one of the arguments, okay? And that doesn't work for science. In science, you need to define the words that make or break your theory because people have to follow your presentation. And if you haven't defined your terms, your crucial terms, the ones that make or break your theory, then we have no idea what you're talking about. And that's the issue with mathematical physics. Mathematical physics cannot define a single term that it uses to make its physical interpretations of phenomena. So all they have is mathematics. They have equations, and they say these are descriptions of what we see out there, what we notice, but it's the physical interpretations that we are attacking here in rational science. We're saying that the physical interpretations are all irrational because they're in the business of moving concepts. And one specific example I can give you is the black hole. Black hole is a singularity. Singularity is a mathematical, not object, concept. Okay? Singularity is a mathematical concept. It's a zero volume, no size mass, unbelievable mass, infinite mass, whatever you want to call it. And this so-called concept, this point that's got in all this mass, moves stars around that are light years away. And so the question is, by what physical mechanism does the little dot, zero-dimensional dot, full of mass, move a star that is far away? I want to know the physical mechanism. That's all I want to understand. If they cannot explain the mechanism, they cannot say, well, it's mass. Mass does not explain the mechanism. And that's the problem with mathematical physics. They're in the process of moving concept. They move force, they move time, they bend time. Okay, and we reject all that. Okay, so the rational science has a different way of looking at the universe, at what science is. And here's another thing that you should keep in mind, which is the method, the rational scientific method. Hypothesis specifically does not refer to what you've learned in high school or college. In high school, college, or if you look it up on the internet or wherever, you'll find that the word hypothesis essentially isn't a synonym of the word theory. Okay, so we're talking about a theory that has not been proven, or a theory that is in its infant stages. It's a first approximation guess of what something is doing. That's not at all what hypothesis means in rational science. And we think they got lost, over the years from what the Greeks thought was a hypothesis. No, a hypothesis has to do, is a synonym of assumptions. Those are the assumptions to explain a theory comes next, which is the mechanism. So what is a hypothesis? Well, it's the assumptions, and it includes specifically the objects and the definitions. It also includes the initial scene, the starting point, of your theory. And then the theory is the explanation, of a mechanism that comes after, that is based on the hypothesis. So we got a different notion of what science is and what what hypothesis is here. And unless you understand that, you're going to be a little lost here, because you have this notion of what you learn in high school or college, and we're going to destroy that notion. Okay? And again, it doesn't mean you have to believe or subscribe to this notion that we're presenting here. It just means that this is what it is. This is what we're proposing. Okay? Whether you subscribe to it or not. And that means that you have to decide for your own self whether you're going to follow these notions, whether they make sense to you. Okay? And if they do, well, then you've learned something. Okay? And that's for the better for all of us. Okay? If you learn, that's what we're here for. Anyways, here's the first comment, and it's got to do with extinction. I'm going to deal first with First, I'm going to deal with extinction. Then I'm going to deal with what we've been dealing with, Mr. St. Thomas of Aquinas, which one issue is the issue of God, and the other one is how the point becomes a particle, and the issues involved with a point and how they are mirrored with the particles. Okay, so let's go with extinction first. Here's the first comment that I'm going to address, and because we've been dealing with the issue of extinction as well. I would expect a catastrophic population drop soon, but I would expect a few more such drops before a final extinction. Okay, so how do we address that issue? Well, here it is. Here's my reply to that. Okay, side by side. There is a slow nuance. There is no slow nuanced gradient. That's a background extinction. What is a background extinction? It's the disappearance of a single species. That's what the term background extinction refers to. The mathematicians, what they've done, or the paleontologists who are mathematicians or think they have to mathematize everything, they say, well, what it is all these background extinctions that happen in the background, species that disappeared before there was a final mass extinction. Well, what are they talking about? They're talking about this disappearance of individual species, single species that disappeared over time. Okay, so they're talking about the rate of extinction rather than looking at the causes of why those single species disappeared all by themselves. And so we do have a mechanism for that. We say the loss of genetic diversity and the overturning of their population pyramid. Now, the background extinction is different than a mass extinction, which happens geologically swiftly compared to a drawn-out background extinction. Okay, what is a mass extinction? The disappearance of a food chain. That's what a mass extinction is. It's the disappearance of a food chain. And what's the mechanism? The overturning of the ecological pyramid. In an entire food chain, starvation takes at most a few weeks. I mean, how long can you live without food and water? That's the issue. Starvation is an exponential mechanism. It takes the species very short time to die, a bunch of species, because they're all interrelated. One depends on the other. So this is not an issue where population of humans is going to die slowly until we reach the year 3000 and we all whittle away from 8 billion to 6 billion to 4 billion to 2 billion people over a course of hundreds of years. That's not what's going to happen here. At least that's not the proposal. You have to understand the theory. And the theory is that we're going to die in a matter of weeks, most people on Earth. Okay, that's the point that the theory emphasizes. Okay, and another comment related to extinction, here it is. See if we can get this up here. Human surviving extinction is a historical fact. With survival bunkers stocked up for many years, survival of human species, sapiens sapiens, is far more likely than in the past. Economic collapse has happened many times to many civilizations. We've recovered from them all because we adapt. Okay, let's see what we say to this. Let me get this thing up here. Okay. Hold it. Yeah, this guy also points out to gives a reference, an article that shows that, extinction has happened many times, but we survived. Okay, the first time was about 1.2 million years ago. The article says that we were few, about 18,000 breeders out of a total population of 26,000, and scattered all over the world in the past, like Homo erectus, ergaster, and sapiens, Homo sapiens. And at all times we were near crash. Okay. All species had better start out small. That's my argument against this. They start out as a branch of the main stem that wanders off and meets new environments. That's where, in isolation, they develop different genes over thousands of years. When the original stem and the new branch meet again, they cannot interbreed. They are two different species. Okay. The other thing the article mentions is climate change and a Toba volcanic explosion in Sumatra, for those of you who have not heard of it. Okay. And so the issue there is that, again, it's paleontologists and all these geneticists who try to figure out what happened in the past, and I don't think they've figured it out. And they look for catastrophic accidents, they look for climate change, and they look for this kind of arguments where they say, well, we were few and thank God that we've survived. And no, for sure, whenever a new species starts out, it's because it branched off the main stem, got lost in a different environment, developed, expanded its genetic diversity. Okay, it expanded its genetic diversity because it encountered a new environment, and different genes have to work in your body to meet those new conditions, that new environment. Okay, so the fact that they're few, yeah, all species start out when they're new. They start out as few. It starts out a little family or a couple families, and they go out and they wander from the main branch. When they're offspring meet 1,000 years later, they're a different species. They can't interbreed with the original species because they encountered a new environment, which is what I say happened to the Neanderthals. The Neanderthals developed in Northern Europe in Arctic weathers, And apparently, for what the record shows, so far at least, that's my opinion so far, my theory, okay, is that humans developed in Africa, and when they came out and they eventually met the borders of they came up to the borders of the Neanderthal Empire, this region of Europe that was full of Neanderthals. They couldn't enter there because the Neanderthals certainly would kill anyone who come in near their hunting grounds. The only time we could come in there finally was when the Neanderthals were gone. So we never met or had sex with a Neanderthal. This is, I think, retarded theory from geneticists. Okay, no, we separated from the Neanderthals like 500, 600,000 years ago. When we met, we had no ability to interbreed. And I think that happens to a lot of species. They go out, they develop different genetic codes, then they can't match. That's in a nutshell. Like tigers and lions, they can have some weird offspring that have little chance of survival. Anyways, the point here is that that and the fact that you have these catastrophic accidents like the Toba explosion, or that you have climate change, those things have nothing to do with extinction. Extinction happens by the two processes just mentioned: background extinction, overturning of the population pyramid, and genetic diversity. We lose it. Every species will lose it over time if they inbreed. Okay, it's just like the Amish. They have sex amongst themselves for the last 500 years. Now they're having all kinds of genetic problems. That's exactly what happens. And it's happening to the human race today. And the other one is the issue of mass extinction. Mass extinctions occurs not because of that, but an economic catastrophe. And the economic catastrophe is that it's foundation. The food, the primary production, especially the plants, they disappear because the plants are undergoing a population pyramid inversion, and they lose their genetic diversity over millions of years. And the animals that forge a relationship with them, they can't change their food sources at the last moment. So that's the theory. You may not agree with it. That's not the point. The point is, that is the theory. If you're going to attack the theory, or you're going to be in favor or propose it, you at least have to understand the theory. And that's the theory in a nutshell. Okay, so final one on extinction. Here's another fellow says, maybe extinction begins. Food production unreliable as seasons are now inconsistent. That's not the theory. Okay, so he might believe that extinction begins because because of climate change. That's not the theory. Okay, so I just want to make sure that whether you agree with the theory or not is irrelevant. The point here is you cannot misinterpret the theory or misrepresent the theory. Here's the theory, okay, in a nutshell. The extinction of man has to do with the collapse of the artificial global economy and not with climate change. It wasn't the changing climate that killed the dinos or the synapsids, nor was it volcanoes or asteroids. What causes all mass extinctions, all of them, okay, is the overturning of the ecological pyramid. It's a food chain collapse. One food chain disappears, another one that's on the margins continues. That's all it is. It is an economic theory and not one contingent on climate or catastrophic accidents. What must disappear in man's artificial economy is money. Okay? And when money is no more, no one can produces or distributes food. With climate change, big agricorps will simply find a way to produce and distribute more food to satisfy demand. Okay, so the issue here is that, people think that this is an issue of climate change, that maybe we can't produce enough food. Believe me, in this sense, the people who are like the narco-capitalists, anarcho-capitalists, I call them narco-caps, they're right. If there's an economic problem, they'll fill the hole. Big corporations, entrepreneurs, individual entrepreneurs, they'll fill the hole. There is no this Malthusian notion that population doubles every 25 years and we can't keep up with it, that's nonsense. Of course we can keep up with it. We have the technology to produce food as much as you want, as long as there's demand and there's the right price. Okay, that's basic economics. You got to take an economics course to understand that. Okay, so that's not the issue. The issue is money disappears. And that's never happened in the history of life on Earth. That's the issue. And when people say, oh, we've had economic collapses in the past, no. We've never had an economic collapse of what I call an economic collapse. An economic collapse means money disappears completely. We don't do any more trade because there's nothing to trade because you won't accept money. Now, where in the history of human existence have you ever seen, since we created money, have you seen any country on the planet where money disappeared completely and nobody had used money anymore, especially globally? And you won't find a case. When I say economic collapse, I'm saying money will be no more. You will not accept money. Why? Because corporations have kicked out every worker out into the streets, and they have no salaries, they have no money to pay for anything. Government can't just give them money from the few workers that remain. There's a limit at which you have workers to unemployed including retired people, including students, housewives, people who actually can't find a job, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you have a ratio there, and that ratio can't go below a certain point because then at that point money has no value, has no point. Okay, and not everybody understands that. And the only issue here is to try to understand it, not whether you agree or not. The issue is understanding that when I say economic collapse, I'm saying money will be no more. When money is no more, agricultural corporations have no reason to plant, produce, or distribute food to the cities. That's when we die, not in a matter of hundreds of years, we die in a matter of weeks. I hope the theory is at least understood, whether you agree with it or not. Okay, let's get on with what we had the other day. And it started out, one of the comments that came around had to do with the block universe. Okay, and the block universe, for those of you who are not familiar with the concept, is that the universe already exists. The future, especially. Future already exists. In other words, you have this block universe. Time is from infinity backwards, or maybe some starting point, but infinity forward, for sure. And the question is, if the block universe exists, then everything that will happen has already happened. There is a movie out there, a universal movie, where everything has already taken place. So what is the relevance of this? The relevance has to do with God. Because if God knows what happened what happens, or what happened, I guess you could say, in the future, if God knows that the next thing I'm going to do is move my left hand or my right hand, if he knows that, I have no free will. It's already happened. I'm just an actor in a movie that's already been produced. Not everybody understands this, but they've been debating this issue now for at least 1,000 years and even more, okay? So again, if God knows what I'm going to do next, I have no free will, and not everybody understands this. Okay, and one of these is this. Well, here's the block universe. By the way, this was by Brian Greene. He shows this block, this bread loaf there, cut into all these slices, and he's saying the future already exists. Okay. And that's one of the notions that comes out of general relativity. Okay, these people believe that, not everyone, but a lot of them believe that there is this so-called block universe, that the future has already happened, and we're kind of just following in the footsteps of what's already happened. So you're just an actor in a movie that's already been produced. Okay, so this guy puts a comment, and apparently he doesn't understand these issues. And so he says, the film has been made, Bill. Okay, great. That means he believes in the block universe. Awareness greater than ours designs it to be so or not. So absolutely, free is our will. So he doesn't understand the issue. No, we can't have free will if the movie has already been made. If God already knows what we're going to do, what every individual is going to do and think and move, everything that whatever you do, if God already knows that you're going to move that finger next, then you don't have free will. You're just an actor in a movie that's been produced. Okay? And so you need to understand the difference between omniscience and free will. You can't have those two simultaneously. If you have omniscience, that outlaws free will and vice versa. God cannot be all-knowing, omniscient. Okay? And he said, I can't view it all. Can you? Irrelevant. No observers in science. Has nothing to do with perception. Okay? And he answers actually his question himself, but he doesn't realize that. He says, events unfold exactly as they do whether we believe. True. Yeah, it doesn't matter what you believe in. Whatever happens, happens, and you can believe anything you want. And belief is outside the bounds of science. Okay, whatever exists or happens, exists or happens irrespective of belief. Okay, so your belief doesn't change anything. You can believe whatever you want. And that's why we don't harp on belief here. What we harp upon instead is explanations. We're saying science is not about belief. That's religion. Physics, especially physics that we do here, has to do with explanations. I want a rational explanation how Mother Nature does her stuff, how she runs her shop. Another comment here, to affirm that the existence of a God is false, we must first have the exact definition of that God without ambiguities. Well, again, this is one of the notions that many atheists have, and we go against this. This is not the correct or the version of the scientific method that we're proposing. Okay, here is a contrast to that so that you know what to contrast it against. We have to determine whether God is an object or a concept. If God is an anthropomorphic being or a burning bush, as Moses met, he's an object. He's a physical object. If, on the other hand, God is love, grace, intelligence, spirit, or who knows what, then he's a concept. In other words, we can't talk about him. We have to say that God is a concept. And you got to decide who you're praying to. Are you praying to a concept or to an object? Maybe you're praying to yourself. Maybe you're watching yourself in the mirror and thinking to yourself. That's all you're doing. Anyways, concepts we define and objects we point to and illustrate. We name them. Okay? What we really need to do is define the word exist. That's what we need to do. Okay? And people don't realize that the more important word when we say God exists is not God, but exist. God is important because in the sense we need to determine whether God is an object or a concept, but only if he's an object can we say that, can we talk about existence. Concepts do not exist for the purposes of physics. Concepts do not exist for the purposes of physics. Please say it 10 times before you go to bed every night. Okay, concepts do not exist. Okay, here we have another comment. Okay, moving along. I cannot seem to find any evidence or proof that eternal living beings do not exist. And if you have such evidence, you'll have to share it. Okay, what's my answer to that? Give me a second here to get these things out, but you got so many of them. Okay, in science we have no use for evidence. Evidence is what a prosecutor uses to persuade, convince, and recruit members of the jury. Evidence, as you rightly said, has to do with proof. In science we don't prove. In science we explain. In physics we explain a mechanism. In order to do this we make an assumption known as a hypothesis. This includes objects such as God. We don't say, I believe that God exists, like the theists say, or doesn't, like the atheists say, or prove, like the agnostics say. Prove to me that God exists or doesn't. We say, let us assume that God exists. Then we proceed to tell our theory based on this assumption. That's how we do it in rational science. Okay? So unless you understand these notions, these differences between what we're proposing, our rational scientific method, and what you've learned in high school or college about what science is, about proof and evidence, and going out there and doing experiments and writing equations, that has nothing to do with science. All that is religion as far as we're concerned. Science, as it relates to physics, is trying to understand how Mother Nature runs her shop. We have to explain mechanisms. We have to do it rationally. What do we mean by rationally? We don't want to move concepts around. We don't want to say that a field did this and time did that and mass did this and force did the other thing. That's what we can't use those words in science because they're not nouns. They're not physical objects. We cannot say that a concept did this and a concept did that. That's like saying love moves mountains. That's okay in poetry and ordinary speech. You can't use that in physics. You can't say that love moved a mountain. That's what these people are doing in mathematical physics. That's the physical interpretations, which they dismiss as philosophy anyway. They say science is math. Descriptions, because math can only describe. Okay, and here's the second reply to that, and that's that, we have to have a definition for the word exist, and we do define this crucial word for physics. Physics is the science of existence, and exist means physical presence. What does physical mean? It relates to an object. What does presence mean? It relates to location. If God wants to exist, he has to exist by definition, not because we believe or don't believe or prove him. If God has distance with respect to other objects in the universe, then he exists by definition. And before that, he obviously has to be a physical object. He's got to be an object. Otherwise, he can't be a concept. He can't be love or intelligence and say God exists. Okay. Another issue, another question brought up. A fellow says, "Who are you to define existence?" You now scientifically define words for the world? Okay, I got a baseball bat in my face there. Okay, what's my reply? Here it is. Okay, let's see if we can get it right. Okay, this is my answer to that. It says, in science, we must define strategic words in order for the audience to follow the dissertation. A skeptic or devil's advocate has a single recourse. He or she must define the key words in the alternative, right? In such a way that it can be used consistently, rationally, scientifically, okay? So if the person doesn't like my definition, who am I? I'm no one. Absolutely no one. I define the word exist so that people can follow my presentation. And if you don't like my definition, okay, you have a single recourse, and that's okay. What is your definition of exist? What do you mean by exist? What do you mean when you say God exists? What did you mean by that statement? And if you can't answer the question, forget about God, but if you can't answer the question of exist, of what exist means in that sentence, in that phrase or whatever, then you've got no counter argument. You got no rejoinder. Okay, so let's get it straight. You need to define words. If you're going to do scientific, if you're going to just go and believe in God, well, that's your problem. We don't care, Okay, so here's a. Let's see if I get this. Another comment. Okay, and this person says he doesn't have location. He is metaphysical. I love some of these answers and questions that people put out there. Okay, what's our response to that? Here it is. Let's see if I get this. Oh my God, trying to get this thing here. Metaphysical. You look up the word. What does it mean? It's highly abstract, subtle, or abstruse. Okay, what does that mean? Well, it means that if God is abstract, if he's metaphysical, he's not physical. And if he's not physical, according to the definition of exist, he's got to be a physical object. He's got to be a thing. And if he's not a thing, if he's metaphysical, if he's just an abstraction, he doesn't exist by definition. You're praying to nothing. You're praying to a concept. And aside from that, God has to have location, which means distance from every object in the universe. Okay, if he wants to exist, and he's going to exist not because we believe or know that he exists or we can prove it, but because we have a definition for the word exist. That's why we can say that God exists or doesn't. Okay, and we don't affirm it. What we say is, let us assume God exists. It's an assumption. It's part of the hypothesis. The existence of God cannot be a theory, can never be an explanation. It can only be an assumption. Okay? And he who doesn't like the definition has a single recourse, and that's, please define the word exist. Don't beat us up on belief and other nonsense that's got to do with religion. Here we're doing science, and if you want to do science, all you got to do is define the word exist. Very simple, very crucial word for physics. Physics is the science of existence. Physics only tries to explain or deal with that which exists. Okay, here's another comment, and it says, he exists outside of space and time. So now we have God has location, but his location is not within our realm. God exists outside space and time. Oh my God, that's, where is he? Let's find out. Okay, here's poor old God, and hopefully he's encapsulated or enclosed within some kind of medium. Maybe it's air. I don't know. Maybe it's water. I don't care what the medium is. You might say it's space, or you might say it's the fourth dimension or the fifth dimension. I mean, I don't know what you're going to mention, but the question is, what medium encapsulates God and gives shape to him? And here's God. This is the best I can picture him. When people say this, I say, God is encapsulated here by some black stuff. I don't care what it is, okay? I haven't defined what that black stuff is. And when I take the black stuff out, God has no shape because I have no contrast. So now what does God look like without the black stuff? So you got to tell me, what it is that encapsulates God. You can't just say God is outside of space and time. Don't tell me where he's not. Tell me where he is. Tell me what gives shape to God if God is an object, because we're going to talk about existence. We have to have an object to begin with. He can't be a concept, okay? Or it can't be a concept. Maybe a she, as many people say. And again, if he exists outside of space and time, just define the word exist and we'll know what you're talking about. The word exist, again, is crucial. We've used it for hundreds of years. Nobody knows what it means because no one has defined it. All we find in the dictionary are synonyms. Reality, being, is, actuality, real, all these are synonyms. You look up those words and they always invoke the word exist. Living, it's always has to do with it. So you're chasing your tail around because there's no definition of the word exist. So you have atheists fighting against theists, and they're all fighting about whether God exists or not. Nobody defined the word exist. That's the situation today. Okay, so it doesn't matter if you go with some of these gurus who talk on television, they debate the existence of God in different ways. Tell them to define the word exist, and you'll find out that not one of them can define the word exist because they haven't defined it in terms of physics, which is the science of existence. Physics only studies that which exists and tries to make sense of what exists. Okay, and here's another comment. Again, lots of comments on existence and God and so on. God created time and space. For something to create time and space, universe, they have to be beyond that, outside of space and time. Okay, time and space. They have to be outside of it in order to create this thing they call time and space, whatever all that stuff is. Okay, so what is my answer to that? Well, here we have good old God. Let's see if I can get him up here. Okay, and he's in his workshop, in his garage. Okay, and hopefully he created space and time before he created humans there, right? Hopefully he's got this conveyor belt. Okay, he's creating all these things. And the question is, how do you create? Tell me the mechanism of how God creates space and how he creates time. What has he created? How do you create time? You move your magic wand 3 times, or, tell me how you create time. And so, to say that God is outside of space and time, he had to be outside of space and time in order to create space and time, which is within him or inferior to him or outside of him. You just got to tell me what space and time are, and so that you can tell me how he created them. I mean, what do you mean? He molded them like silly putty? What are we talking about here? What do you mean he created space and time? How do you create a concept? You put a bunch of seconds in there and time comes into being? Is that how time is created? What does it mean to say that that God created space and time? Please rationalize it for me. I don't care about whether God did or not. I want to know your reasoning. You have to tell me what the reasoning is. I can't go to God and ask him because, I have trouble with him. I'm angry at him. He's angry at me, so he doesn't talk to me anymore. So I want you to tell me, okay? Give me your peace of mind. Okay, and here we have another fella. He has another comment. Let's see if I can get this thing here. Give me a second. Here it goes. There are a lot of things in this universe that don't truly exist until observed or believed in. Oh, so existence has to do with observing and believing? Is that what existence has to do with? And again, this is my answer to that. Okay, and it's got to do with this. Says, where in the definition of exists is there a provision for observation or belief? Okay, here you see the definition. Exists, physical presence, object plus location. An object exists if it has location. That means there is distance between that object and all the other objects in the universe. That's the definition. You don't like the definition? Fine. Please define the word exist before you use it in a sentence. Don't tell me I'm wrong. Don't tell me I'm right. Don't tell me you believe, you don't believe. Just tell me what the word exist means. And if you can't define the word exist, you have no case. And people don't like that, okay? They say, hold it, you're destroying my religion, getting away with it. All I'm asking is for a simple definition of the word exist. If you can define the word exist, which no one has been able to in 10,000 years, you don't have a case. You don't have an argument, okay? Especially a rational argument, okay? Okay, so let's move on to particles, which is what I was going to deal with today to some degree, but it's got to do also with the existence of particles and so on. People made comments about that. Particles at the quantum level or subatomic level are in all places at all times, existing all possible locations at the same time until observed. So this individual says a particle is everywhere. I guess that's the ether that he's talking about. I don't know what he's referring to. What do you mean a particle? If one particle is everywhere at once, is that what we're saying here? Is that what quantum mechanics, the religion of quantum mechanics, says, that a particle can be at many places at the same time? Well, this is my answer to that. Let's see if I can get this thing up here. Again, I got a million of these here. And here it is. No one can rationalize one particle being in many places at once. What sense does that mean? How can one tree be at many places at the same time? And people say, well, a tree, that's a macro object, a rock, a house. We're talking about quantum particles here. Okay, quantum particles. How can it be at many places at the same time? I mean, what sense does that make? How can you rationalize that? So this is not science. This is voodoo magic. Okay, no explanation at all. We have no rationalization of a particle being at many places at once. This is spiritual science. Okay, that's what you're just a religionist who thinks he's doing science. That's all it is. This irrational explanation is the result of insisting on particles. There are no such things as particles, and mathematical so-called physicists explain everything in terms of particles, and that's why they can't explain anything rationally, because there are no such things as individual discrete particles. Specifically, you cannot explain how one particle affects another. One discrete particle affects another from a distance. Action at a distance is forbidden in quantum mechanics. They never have been able to rationalize that, so they say it just does so. And the only way they can, only other way they can do that is by saying, well, the particle's everywhere at once, and that's how it affected this other particle. something known as entanglement. This particle instantly affects another particle. How does it do it? What's the mechanism? Please explain the mechanism. And they say, well, it does so. It just does. And you say, well, can you rationalize it for me? Well, yeah, the particles everywhere at the same time, because that's what Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, indeterminism, proved. So we have these principles that these people introduced to give the physical explanation or interpretation to something that has no possibility of rationalization. The only way to believe in this is by drinking lots of Kool-Aid. Okay, I hope you drank I drink beer instead, okay? So, from snake oil peddler. So, what is that? It's authority. It means you swallowed it on the basis of authority because your preacher told you so, and you have no reason to doubt your preacher. So you say, all these mathematical physics, they can't be all wrong, can they? I mean, if you're in Harvard, right, and you're, why did you go to Harvard? How did you get to Harvard? First, you got in there because you're someone special. And second, you're in there not because you're going to do some real science, but because you're going to do a career. And doing a career has nothing to do with doing real investigation in science. Career means that you get to know all these people who are going to put you in the high places, get you a good job. So the worst place to get an education is in places like Harvard or Cambridge or Oxford or the Ivy League or whatever. All these colleges, all that is for has nothing to do with science. It has to do with politics, with religion, with getting a job and having a career. It has nothing to do with doing honest to goodness research and finding out how the universe works. So when these people say, oh, I studied at Harvard, I got this PhD, so I know. No, all he knows is what he memorized. That's all he knows. He hasn't done any research. He cannot rationalize for you how a particle can be at several places at once. If you want to believe that, that's fine. I mean, you can believe whatever you want. But if you believe that a particle can be at many places at once, just rationalize it for me. And you won't be able to. You'll just say it is so, and that's it. That's all you can say. Okay. So let's move on here. And here's another comment, again related to particles and points, which we'll be dealing with next time around. A point is the smallest perceptible thing. Okay, what's the problem with that? Well, the problem with that is that, give me a second here, put it up. There's so many of these. Okay, this is the problem. Science has nothing to do with perception. Okay, we don't use our senses, meaning observers, verifying, proving. Science doesn't do any of that. Science only explains. And then a thing is that which has shape. But mathematical physics says that a point is equal to a location, not to a thing. So location is a concept. It's not an object. And so they're saying point is a location. So I don't care if it's perceptible or a thing. That's not what mathematical physics says or geometry says. Mathematical physics says it's a location. Location is a concept. It has nothing to do with geometry or with things. The dot is the thing. That's equal to, a two-dimensional or three-dimensional thing. That's fine. But location is a non-dimensional concept. So the issue is not whether what you believe or think a point is. The issue is how it is used in mathematical physics. Okay? Here's another comment. We can move along here. Okay, and it says there are particles, they exist outside of the space and time, or time and space. Again, we have this issue of like God. God is outside of. They always put it beyond your reach. You can't even reach it mentally. They say, no, because God, the particle is outside of space and time, or the point is outside of space and time. Location is outside of space and time. Everything's outside of your mental reach. That's essentially the argument. And why did they do that? Because they cannot explain a single thing with it, okay? And so here's my argument against that. Give me a second here. Okay. Here we have space and time. There are different representations of what space and time or space-time is. One is the WMAP that's been made out, a mapping of the universe, of the visible universe. Another one you can think of is the Tesseract, and you have this four-dimensional, unimaginable universe. And the other one is obviously the warp fishnet or canvas, okay? Think of it, I don't know how you think of space-time. That's up to each individual to figure out. But then the question is, what is the black stuff? I want to know where the particle is. What are we saying when we say that the particle is outside of space and time? Okay, this is what these people have to answer. They can't just say, they just can't put it beyond the reach of your mind and say, well, you know, we cannot explain it because it's outside of space and time. It's beyond anything we can imagine. That's not an answer, because you have to tell me where it is if it's beyond space and time. What is there besides space and time? What is out there? Intelligence, fourth dimension, 10th dimension? What is out there beyond space and time? If you cannot identify the medium that's outside of space and time, or the particle, or God, or the spirits, or the devil, or whoever's out there is, then you cannot rationalize what you're saying. And you cannot say, well, we cannot rationalize anything, because then you're not a rational human being. You cannot say that that you're going to show me scientifically that you're correct, or that your theory has merits. That's the issue, okay? I mean, if you cannot explain it, if you say it's just beyond space and time, that you have no argument. Okay, one of the arguments that people use is that, yeah, it's outside of space and time because, you know, it's like trying to say that what's north of the North Pole, or, you know, we have no way of proving or verifying or testing with an experiment what's out there outside of the visible universe, outside of space and time. This is not an issue of proving or of running an experiment. It's an issue of, you know, before you do an experiment, you got to do a design of experiment. And if the guy can't design an experiment on the board, forget about going out there and doing the experiment. You got to design it on a board. You got to imagine it. If you cannot even imagine it, what are you going to try to prove? What experiment are you going to run? And so they say things like, you know, what's north of the North Pole? Well, we can't answer that. Well, yes, we can. Unfortunately, we can for you, you know. Here it is. Here's what's north of the North Pole, called the star named Sirius. That's north of the North Pole. Okay, so there is something north of the North Pole for those who use that argument. Change your argument. There's got to be some other argument you can find around, okay? So yeah, we don't prove things unless, first we don't prove things, but if you think that there's something outside of space and time, conceptualize it for us first. Then we can ponder it. We can analyze what you're saying. But if you cannot even imagine what's beyond space and time, you cannot just leave it dangling with a loose end and saying, well, you figure it out. No. This is your theory, not mine. If you say there's something beyond space and time, conceptualize it for me. Imagine it for me. Put it on the board for me. Only then can I make sense of it. Okay, anyways, I'm going to hopefully get back to Mr. St. Thomas Aquinas on, on Sunday. And we're going to deal with how Mr. Aquinas invented quantum mechanics. And hopefully I'll see you then on Sunday. So we'll see you then. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.